1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's Talk Radio. This is Your Turn, a live call-in show featuring spirited discussion and debate about issues that matter to the community. Stay with us to hear what Northwest Florida thinks. Better yet, call in at 623-1330 and tell us what you think. It's Your Turn here on 1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's Talk Radio. Now, here's the host of Your Turn.
It's Freedom Friday. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to another edition of Your Turn with your host, Carl Gallups. Well, I'm so glad that you tuned us in. You can listen to it live if you'd like. We're streaming on the net at 1330weby.com. Just follow the link in the upper left-hand corner there on the page. And follow the instructions, and in no time you can be up and running and listening to us live, streaming on the net. We're so proud that you're listening. Listen, today's show is going to be decidedly a little different, because what I'm going to share with you today needs to be said. And I believe that you need to hear it. The first hour of today's Your Turn is going to be dedicated to the truth about what is happening with Israel and the world. Today, if you will listen to this show, you will hear the truth. Why does everyone seem to hate Israel so much? What is up with the Palestinians and the Israelis? And who are the Palestinians? Do they really have a claim to the land of Israel? Is Israel really nothing more than an illegal occupying nation? And then why is that whole area over there called Palestine in the first place? Why does the news media constantly refer to that as Palestine? And how did the so-called Palestinians get there? How did the Jews get there? Was there ever a Palestinian nation before Israel? See, these and so many other questions are going to be answered for you today with verifiable, documented, historical fact. That's all in the first hour edition of Your Turn. Now, the second hour is going to be closely related, but I hope perhaps just as provocative, even more provocative, maybe even more thought-provoking. The second hour of today's Your Turn is going to be devoted to proving the existence of God. Undeniably, irrefutable proof that there is a God, and He is the God of the Bible, and that there are no other gods other than the God Yahweh of the Bible, and proof that the Bible is the only real Word of God, and that it is accurate. Now, the second hour, I'm going to deal with all of this because it is closely and directly connected with the presence of the nation of Israel in the world, and the hatred of the world directed toward Israel. Believe me when I tell you, it's connected to the proof of the existence of God, a God, the only God, the God of the Bible, and that the Bible is the only and final and accurate, true Word of God. Now, I know this probably sounds to you like it's going to be a religious show or a preaching show or like you go into church, but I promise you it's not going to be like that at all. I hope that you'll find this show absolutely fascinating. We're also going to deal in that second hour, by the way, with some biblical end-time prophecy as it relates to what's happening in the world today, especially, and again, as it relates to Israel. And so, regardless of your religious views or your political views, I trust that you will find this show today informative and enlightening and fascinating and, who knows, maybe even inspiring, perhaps even life-changing for you. Most of our listeners here know, most of our listeners here on WBY know that I have been for many, many years now also a pastor here in the local community in Santa Rosa County. I'm the pastor of Hickory Hammock Baptist Church. It's a Southern Baptist church on a major thoroughfare to the beach, a road called Hickory Hammock Road. Thus, the church derives its name from that road and that community, the Hickory Hammock Baptist Church. For over a couple of decades now, I've had the honor of being the pastor. So while most of the time On your turn, we talk about politics and local and regional and national and international affairs and the politics that go along with them. But I also come from an unashamedly biblical worldview. That is, I try to measure, because of who I am as a Christian and as a pastor, but I try to measure everything that I see around me through the Word of God. And I'm not ashamed of this. I come from a biblical worldview. I don't come from a secular worldview. That is, a view that just leaves out any thought of the existence of a God. I come from a biblical worldview. And the Bible interpreted in its context. I also host the Ask the Preacher program, heard right here on WEBY, every week, every Sunday morning at 7:30, and again every Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. So this topic about Israel and how it relates to politics and world affairs and international intrigue, and how it relates to the Bible. What does the Bible have to say about Israel and even the last days? Does Israel figure into all of this? And well, let me just say the answer. The answer is yes. For several thousand years, the Bible has been speaking, perhaps, of the days that we're living in. The Bible has been speaking of a time when Israel would come back to the land and all of the political intrigue that would ensue after Israel came back to the land. Now, the reason I say came back to the land, most of our listeners, or a lot of our listeners, I suppose, have only lived in the time when Israel has been in the land, since 1948. But prior to 1948, there was a period of some 2,000 years of history when there was no Israel. Yet the Bible said and prophesied for all of those 2,000 years that there would be an Israel one day. Israel would come back to the land, even though the people had been scattered to the nations of the world, that there would arise among the nations a national Israel again, in the same place, basically the same borders, with the same or even greater power than she's ever had, and nations would be surrounding her that hated her, and people would be constantly attacking her, but yet no one would ever really be able to truly defeat her. The Bible said those words. Now, I'm paraphrasing them, but the Bible said those and many other amazing and fascinating things about Israel for 2,000 years, none of which came true until 1948. And here we are, over 60 years later, and there is Israel sitting here for over 60 years, surrounded by nations that hate her, basically within the same biblical border she had before, with a power like she never had before. Now she is nuclear armed, backed by nuclear superpowers. Nations of the world hate her. She's been attacked over and over and over again, yet she's never been defeated. And Israel is the center of world attention today. Tonight on the evening news. So what is all of this about? What is all of this about? So you can see that this topic is near and dear to me naturally. But listen, folks, more than that, it should be near and dear to you. Because again, regardless of your religious persuasion, regardless of your faith, or even if you have no faith at all, the fact remains that Israel is the center of world attention, and it has been for decades. And it appears, simply from a totally secular point of view, that it seems to be the flashpoint in the Middle East and world politics and United Nations proclamations. I mean, folks, it seems to me that if World War III were to start, and I pray that it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but the Bible seems to prophesy of an impending World War III, if you will. It seems that if World War III were to start, that it would almost have to have something to do with Israel. Because this climate that I'm speaking of is true, and you know it's true. So I hope that you'll stay tuned for this show today. Again, the first hour, right after we come back from our break, the first section of this show, the first part of our show today, of Your Turn, with your host, Carl Gallups, the first part of it is going to be dedicated to the historical, geopolitical, biblical truth, verifiable facts about Israel and why she's hated, who she really is, Who are the Palestinians? Why do the Palestinians hate Israel? Why do the Palestinians claim that they have allegiance to or access to the land and Israel should not? Why do they call Israel occupiers? Why is it that nobody seems to be supporting Israel? I hope you'll stay tuned. Call other people. Gather them around. Record this show. You don't want to miss what you're going to hear next. Listen, before we go to our first break, you got to hear this. It comes from the Bible, the book of Zechariah, chapter 12, the first 3 verses, and then verse 9. This was written 2,400 years ago. This is before Israel came back to the land. This is when there was no Israel in the land. And listen to what the Word of God says. This is the word of the Lord concerning Israel, the Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation of the earth, and who forms the spirit of man within him, declares, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. And on that day, and by the way, this prophecy is speaking of the end times, the last days, just before the return of Jesus Christ. Verse 3 says, and on that day, when all of the nations of the earth have gathered against Israel, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all of the nations, and all who try to move it will injure themselves. And then listen to verse 9. And on that day, I will set out to destroy all of the nations that attack Jerusalem. Pretty ominous words, written 2,400 years ago. 2,340 years before there was a nation of Israel on the world scene. Yet the Word of God had proclaimed that there would one day be an Israel, and that the nations of the earth would hate her, and they would attack her, but they would lose. Folks, in the evening news, now, right before your eyes, this is happening. Stay tuned.